Last Scabbard of Akrash by Tabur Kish. For several warm summer days in the year Third Era 407, a young, pretty Domna woman in a veil regularly visited one of the master armourers in the city of Tyr. The locals decided that she was young and pretty, but her figure and her poise, though no one ever saw her face. She and the armourer would retire to the back of his shop, and he would close down his business and dismiss his apprentice for a few hours. Then at mid-afternoon she would leave, only return at precisely the same time the next day. As gossip goes, it was fairly meagre stuff, though what the old man was doing with such a well-dressed and attractively proportioned woman was the source of several crude jokes. After several weeks the visit stopped and life returned to normal in the slums of Tyr. It was not until a month or two after the visits had stopped that in one of the many taverns in the neighbourhood a young local tailor, having imbibed too much sauce, asked the armourer, "So whatever happened to your lady friend? You break her heart?" The armourer, well aware of the rumours, simply replied, "She is a proper young lady of quality. There was nothing between her and the likes of me." "What was she doing at your shop every day for?" asked the tavern wench, who had been dying to get the subject open. "If you must know," said the armourer, "I was teaching her the craft." "You're putting us on," laughed the tailor. "No, the young lady had a particular fascination with my particular kind of artistry," the armourer said with a hint of pride before getting lost in the reverie. "I taught her how to mend swords specifically, with all kinds of nicks and breaks, hairline fissures, cracked pommels, quillons and grips. When she first started she had no idea how to skew the grips to the tang of the blade. Well, of course, she was green to start off with. Why wouldn't she be? But she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. I taught her how to patch the little inlaid silver and gold filigree and find unruly line blades, and how to polish it all to a mirror sheen so the swords looked like the gods just pulled it from the celestial anvil." The tavern wench and the tailor laughed out loud. No matter what he alleged, the armourer was speaking at the young lady's training as another man speaks of a long-lost love. More of the locals in the tavern would have listened to the armourer's pathetic tale, but more important gossip had taken precedence. There was another murdered slave trader found in the centre of town, gutted from fore to aft, that made 6 of them total in barely a fortnight. Some called the killer the Liberator, but that sort of anti-slavery zeal was rare among the common folk. They preferred calling him the Lobber, as several of the earlier victims had been completely beheaded. Others had been simply perforated, sliced or gutted, but the Lopper had kept his original sobriquet. While the enthusiastic hooligans made bets about the conditions of the next slave trader's corpse, several dozen of the surviving members of the trade were meeting at the man house in Serho Dress, Minagua. Minagua was a minor houseman of house dress, but a major member of the slave trading fraternity. Perhaps his best years were behind him, but his associates still counted on him for wisdom. "We need to take what we know of this Lopper and search accordingly," said Minagua, seating in front of his opulent hearth. "We know he has an unreasonable hatred of slavery and slave traders. We know he is skilled with a blade. We know he has the stealth of finesse to execute our most well-secured brethren in the most secure abodes. It sounds to me to be an adventurer, an outlander. Surely no citizen of Morrowind would strike at us like this." The slave traders nodded in agreement. An outlander seemed most likely for their troubles. It was always true. "Were I 50 years younger, I would take down my blade Akrash from the hearth." Minagua made an expansive gesture at the shimmering weapon. "And join you in seeking out this terror. Search him out where adventurers meet, taverns and guild halls, then show him a little lopping of my own." The slave traders laughed politely. "You wouldn't let us borrow your blade for the execution, I suppose, would you, Sergio?" asked Sir Angeles, a young to a dying slaver, enthusiastically. "I would be an excellent use for Akrash," sighed Minagua, "but I vowed to retire her when I retired." Minagua called for his daughter, Pelia, to bring the slavers more Flynn, but they waved the girl away. It was to be a night for hunting the Lopper, not drinking away their troubles. Minagua heartily approved of their devotion, particularly as expensive as the liquid was getting to be. When the last of the slaves had left, the old man kissed his daughter on the head, took one last admiring look at Akrash and toddled off to bed. No sooner had he done so when Pelia had the blade off the mantle and was flying with it across the field behind the manor house. She knew Kazaa had been waiting for her for hours in the stables. He sprung out as her from the shadows, and wrapping his strong, furry arms around her, kissed her long and sweet. Holding her as long as she dared to, she finally broke away and handed him the blade. He tested its edge. The finest Khajiitai swordsmith couldn't hone an edge this keen, he says, looking at his beloved with pride, and I know I nicked it up good last night. That you did, said Pelias. You must have cut through an iron cuirass. The slaves are taking precautions now, he replied. What did that say during their meeting? I think it's an outlander adventurer, she laughed. It didn't occur to any of them that a Khajiit slave would possess the skill to commit all these loppings. And your father doesn't suspect that it is the Akrash that is striking into the heart of oppression? Why would he, when every day he finds it fresh as the day before? Now I must go before everyone notices. I'm gone. My nurse sometimes comes in to ask me some details about the wedding, as I had any choice in the matter at all. I promise you, said Khazar very seriously, you will not be forced into any marriage to cement your family's slave-dealing dynasty. The last Scabbard of Akrash will be seethed into will be your father's heart. And when you are orphan, you can free the slaves, move to more enlightened province, and marry who you like. Wonder who that will be, Pelias teased, and raced out of the stables. Just before dawn, Pelias awoke and crept out the garden, where she found Akrash hiding in the bitter green vines. The edge was still relatively keen, but there were scratches vertically across the blade's surface. Another beheading, she thought, as she took pumice stone and patiently rubbed out the marks, finally polishing it with a solution of salt and vinegar. It was up on the mantel in pristine condition when her father came into the sitting room for his breakfast. When the news came that Camilla Turam, Pelias' husband-to-be, had been found outside at a canton, his head on a spike some feet away, she did not have to pretend to grieve. Her father knew she did not want to marry him. It is a shame, he said. The lad was a good slaver. There are plenty of other young men who would appreciate an alliance with our family. What about young Soren Gelez? 2 nights later, Soren Gelez was visited by the Lopper. The struggle did not take long, but Soren had armed himself with one small defence, a needle dipped in the ichor of poison plant hidden up his sleeve. After the mortal blow, he collapsed forward and struck Khazar in the calf with the pin. By the time he made it back to the Mangwar manor house, he was dying. Vision blurring, he climbed up to the eaves of the house to Pelias' window and rapped. Pelias did not answer immediately, as she was in a deep, wonderful sleep, dreaming about her future with her Khajiitai lover. He rapped louder, which woke up not only Pelias but also her father in the next room. Khazar, she cried, opening up the window. The next person in the bedroom was Minagor himself. As she saw it, this slave, his property, was about to lop off the head of his daughter. His property with his sword, his property. Suddenly, with the energy of a young man, Minagor rushed at the dying Khajiit, knocked the sword out of his hand. Before Pelias could stop him, his father had thrust the blade into her lover's heart. The excitement over, the old man dropped the sword and turned to the door to call the guard. As an afterthought, it occurred to him to make certain that his daughter hadn't been injured and might require a healer. Minagor turned to her. For a moment he felt simply disorientated, feeling the force of the blow, but not the blade itself. Then he saw the blood, and he felt the pain. Before he fully realised that his daughter had stabbed him with Akrash, he was dead. The blade at last found its scabbard. A week later, after the official investigations, the slave was buried in an unmarked grave in the manor field, and Sergio Jerez Minagor found his resting place in a modest corner of the family's opulent mausoleum. A larger crowd of curious onlookers came to view the funeral at the noble slaver whose secret life was as the savage Lopper as his competitors. The audience was respectfully quiet, though there was not a person there not imagining the final moments of the man's life, attacking his own daughter in his madness, luckily defended by the loyal hapless slave before turning the blade on himself. Among the viewers was an old armourer who saw for one last time the veiled young lady before she disappeared forever from Tyr.